The night my mother-in-law tried to throw me out of the Whitaker family home, she forgot one small detail. The house had never belonged to her. Evelyn Whitaker sat at the head of the dining table, as if the carved mahogany beneath her hands had been built for her bloodline alone. The chandelier above us scattered warm gold light over crystal glasses, silver chargers, and faces that had already decided what I was before I opened my mouth. Andrew sat to my left, my husband of 3 years, heir to Whitaker Development Group, a man who could negotiate $100 million projects without blinking but could not look his own mother in the eye when she was hurting his wife. His jaw was tight. His hand rested near mine, but not close enough to touch. That distance told me everything before Evelyn did. She slid a cream-colored envelope across the table with 2 fingers, perfectly manicured, perfectly calm. "Claire," she said, her voice smooth enough to pass for kindness in a room full of strangers, "it is time we stop pretending this marriage is working." No one moved. Andrew's uncle stared into his wineglass. His cousin looked down at her lap. A family attorney I had never met sat beside the fireplace with a leather folder on his knees, pretending this was a civilized conversation and not an ambush. I looked at the envelope, then at Andrew. "Did you know about this?" His throat moved. "Claire, just listen." That was not an answer. Or maybe it was the loudest answer he had ever given me. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, pearls resting against the collar of her ivory blouse. "You came into this family with nothing," she said. "You will leave the same way. The agreement is generous enough to avoid embarrassment, provided you sign quickly and vacate the property within 48 hours. The property. Not our home. Not even the house. The property." I could feel the old wood under my palm. The same table I had polished by hand after a winter leak left a pale mark near the edge. I knew the uneven grain near Andrew's chair, the hidden drawer in the library desk, the second stair that creaked unless you stepped toward the wall. I knew this house in ways Evelyn never had, because I had loved it before I ever loved her son. Andrew finally whispered, "It is better than a public fight." Something inside me went very still. Not broken. Still. Like a room after the music stops and everyone realizes the next sound will matter. I turned back to Evelyn. She looked satisfied, almost bored, as if my life were a document she could file away before dessert. "You have 48 hours, she repeated. "After that, we will take legal steps." I let my fingers rest on the mahogany a moment longer, feeling the cool polish, the weight of history, the quiet secret beneath all their certainty. Then I looked at the woman who had spent 3 years calling me temporary inside a house my father had saved, inside a house she believed her name made sacred, and I asked softly, "Are you sure you want to do this here?" Evelyn's smile thinned. "Where else would we do it?" I looked around the dining room at the oil portraits, the tall windows, the family crest etched into the cabinet glass, and finally at Andrew, who still could not meet my eyes. "That is exactly what I was wondering," I said. Because by sunrise, every person at that table would learn the truth Evelyn had never bothered to ask. The Whitakers were not removing me from their home. They were sitting in mine. 3 years before Evelyn slid that envelope across the dining table, I first entered Whitaker House through the service entrance with a canvas tool bag over one shoulder and sawdust on the cuffs of my jeans. Back then I was still Claire Bennett, not Claire Whitaker, and the house was just another restoration job, at least that was what I told myself. It sat behind iron gates on a quiet road in Lake Forest, 20 miles north of Chicago, with limestone columns, ivy climbing the east wall, and windows so tall they seemed designed to make ordinary people feel temporary. I had been hired to restore the old library after a pipe leak damaged the walnut shelves and warped part of the floor. Evelyn did not greet me that morning. A house manager pointed me down the hall and said, "Mrs. Whitaker prefers workers stay out of the family areas." Workers. I almost smiled. My father had taught me to respect old houses before I was tall enough to reach a doorknob. He said every scratch, hinge, and loose stair had a memory if you knew how to listen. So I listened. I listened to the soft groan of the second stair, the hollow space behind the library paneling, the way afternoon light turned amber through the leaded glass. That first week I worked quietly with my sleeves rolled up, sanding, matching stain, cataloging damage, and eating lunch on the back steps because no one invited me anywhere else. Then Andrew found me there one afternoon, holding a paper plate from the kitchen and looking embarrassed by his own house. "I brought you a sandwich," he said. I am sorry no one thought to offer. He was different then, or maybe I needed him to be. He wore no tie, just a blue button-down with the sleeves pushed up, and when he spoke, his voice carried the careful softness of a man who had grown up around hard opinions. He asked about the library shelves, not the cost, not the schedule, but the wood. He asked what could be saved. I remember looking at him and thinking that was a beautiful question. What can be saved? Over the next month, he kept finding reasons to stop by the library. Coffee from town. A question about a cracked molding. A book he claimed he needed from a shelf I had already emptied. We talked between drop cloths and open windows, about Chicago winters, my father's restoration work, his pressure inside the family company, and the strange loneliness of living in a house full of people who cared more about legacy than laughter. I fell for the man who sat on the dusty floor beside me and admitted he hated bored dinners. I fell for the man who said, "This place feels more alive when you are working in it." When he proposed a year later, Evelyn smiled for the photographs but not for me. At the engagement brunch, she lifted her champagne glass and said, "Love is sweet, dear. But bloodlines are serious." Everyone laughed softly, as if it were a charming old family joke. I did not laugh. Andrew squeezed my hand under the table and whispered, "Ignore her." That became his answer for everything. Ignore the comment about my clearance rack dress. Ignore the seating chart that placed me near distant cousins while Andrew sat beside investors. Ignore the way Evelyn corrected staff who called me Mrs. Whitaker too soon. I ignored so much that silence began to feel like part of my wedding vows. Still, I believed love could outlast pride. I believed Andrew would grow braver once we were married. I believed if I gave the family enough kindness, enough patience, enough proof that I wanted him and not his name, they would eventually see me. What I did not know then was that Evelyn had already decided I could never belong. And what Evelyn did not know was that the house she used to measure my worth had a history tied to my family long before I ever wore her son's ring. Whitaker House was never just a house to me. Long before I married Andrew, long before Evelyn measured me against silverware, family portraits, and names carved into old stone, my father had stood in that same library with a flashlight between his teeth and dust on his shoulders, trying to keep the ceiling from giving up after years of neglect. I was 17 the first time he brought me there. Not through the front doors, of course. Men like my father entered beautiful places from the side, carrying ladders, drop cloths, and invoices people delayed paying. He was a restoration contractor, the kind wealthy families called when they wanted history repaired without ever admitting they had let it decay. I remember standing in the library, while he ran his hand along the cracked walnut shelves. "Houses remember who cares for them," he told me. "People forget. Wood does not." At the time I thought he was only teaching me about craftsmanship. Years later, I understood he had been telling me about dignity. The Whitakers were already in trouble then, though no one outside a few quiet offices knew it. Their development company had taken losses, loans had been moved around, and the house Evelyn treated like a crown had nearly slipped into foreclosure behind closed doors. My father never told me the details while he was alive. He only said there were some debts people wore like tailored coats, invisible unless you knew where to look. After he passed, I found the cedar document box in his workshop, tucked beneath old blueprints and brass hinges wrapped in newspaper. My name was written on an envelope in his careful block letters. Inside were copies of deeds, trust documents, tax records, and a letter from Martin Hale, the real estate attorney my father trusted more than anyone. The letter explained what my father had done. Years earlier, when Whitaker House was at risk, he had quietly joined a preservation trust, paid off the outstanding lien with money from a settlement he never spoke about, and later arranged for the property to pass to me. The Whitakers had continued living there under a long-term family occupancy agreement, one wrapped in legal language so polite it almost hid the truth. They maintained the image. We held the ownership. I sat on the cold concrete floor of my father's workshop for almost an hour that day, reading each page until the words stopped swimming. I could have told Andrew before the wedding. Maybe I should have. But every time I tried, something stopped me. I did not want the first real power I held in that family to become the center of our marriage. I did not want Andrew to look at me and see leverage. More than anything, I did not want to become like Evelyn, measuring love by what could be owned. So I kept the cedar box in a storage unit under my maiden name. I paid the trust-related taxes through Martin Hale's office. I signed what needed signing. And I let the Whitakers keep believing their own story because for a while, I thought peace was worth the silence. But silence has a way of feeding the people who benefit from it. After the wedding, Evelyn spoke of Whitaker House as if my presence there were a privilege renewed daily by her patience. She corrected the flowers I chose for the entryway. She told the staff not to move her grandmother's silver without asking her, even after Andrew told them I was now mistress of the house. Mistress. The word sounded grand, but it gave me less power than the housekeeper's key ring. When I suggested repairing the south porch before winter, Evelyn said, "That part of the house has survived longer than you have been a Whitaker, dear." I almost answered, "And longer than you have legally owned it." Instead, I smiled and called the contractor myself. I told myself restraint was grace. I told myself one day Andrew would stand beside me. But each insult settled into the walls like dust. And every room I knew by heart began to feel like a place where I was expected to be grateful for permission. The strangest part was that the house seemed to know the truth even when no one else did. The second stair still creaked for me. The library door still opened with a small sigh when I turned the brass handle. In the evenings, when Evelyn hosted dinners beneath portraits of Whitaker men who had borrowed more than they built, I would stand in the hallway and touch the paneling my father had restored, reminding myself that belonging is not always announced. Sometimes it waits quietly in a cedar box, with your name written on the envelope. Evelyn did not try to remove me all at once. Women like her understood that a door slammed in public made noise, but a door closed 1 inch at a time could be called tradition. It began with the gate code. One rainy Tuesday in October, I came home from a design consultation in Evanston and typed the numbers I had used for 2 years. The keypad blinked red. I tried again. Red. A delivery truck waited behind me, its headlights shining through the rain, while I sat in my car outside the iron gates like a stranger asking permission to enter. When I called Andrew, he sounded distracted. "Mother changed it for security." "I thought someone told you." Someone. That was the shape of blame in our marriage, always floating somewhere without a name. Evelyn apologized at dinner with a smile that did not reach her eyes. I assumed Andrew would handle it. These little household details are hard to track. The next week, an invitation to a family foundation luncheon never reached me. Evelyn told the board I was overwhelmed with personal projects. The week after that, I arrived at a Whitaker development reception and found my name missing from the seating chart. Andrew said it was probably an oversight. "Just ignore it," he whispered, guiding me toward the back of the room where junior associates and distant cousins stood with plates of shrimp and polite smiles. I wanted to ask him how many oversights it took before a pattern became visible, but he looked so tired, so desperate for the evening to remain smooth, that I swallowed the question. That was Andrew's gift and his weakness. He could make silence feel like kindness. Evelyn's campaign was never messy. She did not shout. She did not insult me in ways that could be repeated without sounding cruel. She preferred sentences that arrived wrapped in silk. Claire has such practical taste. She is still learning how our family does things. Some people marry into history and never quite understand the weight of it. At charity lunches, women with pearl earrings and perfect posture would smile at me as if I were a guest whose invitation had been extended by mistake. At home, staff began asking Evelyn for approval on things I had already decided. Flowers, menus, repairs, even the guest room linens. Once I found Mrs. Rosa Miller, the housekeeper who had worked there since Andrew was in college, standing in the hallway with 2 sets of napkins in her hands, looking embarrassed. "Mrs. Whitaker wants the ivory ones tonight," she said softly. "I chose the blue." Rosa lowered her voice. "I know, Mrs. Clare." Mrs. Clare. Not quite the title Evelyn claimed, not quite the dismissal others offered. It was Rosa's small act of respect, and some nights it kept me from feeling invisible. Andrew noticed more than he admitted. I saw it in the way he looked away when his mother corrected me, in the way his fingers tightened around his glass when she mentioned Victoria Lane, the daughter of a real estate investor who had known him since boarding school. Victoria began appearing everywhere that winter. At foundation breakfasts, at company dinners, at the Christmas open house, standing beside Evelyn near the fireplace as if she had been placed there by a decorator. beautiful blonde, polished and easy with the rules of that world. Evelyn introduced her as practically family. Then she turned to me and added, "Claire understands. We all have old ties." I laughed softly because the alternative was saying what every person in that room already knew. Evelyn was not remembering old ties. She was measuring replacements. That night, after the guests left, I found Andrew in the library, loosening his tie beneath the shelves my father had saved. "You have to tell her to stop," I said. He closed his eyes. "Claire, please. Not tonight." "Then when?" He turned toward me, and for one moment I saw the man from the dusty library floor, the man who had asked what could be saved. But he was gone almost as soon as he appeared. In his place stood the Whittaker heir, trained since childhood to avoid discomfort by surrendering to the strongest person in the room. "My mother is difficult," he said. "But she is my mother. I waited for the rest. And you are my wife." It never came. The fire cracked softly behind him. The old house settled around us. I placed my hand on the library desk, feeling the hidden drawer beneath the carved edge, and understood with a clarity that hurt more than anger. Evelyn was not winning because she was stronger than me. She was winning because Andrew kept handing her the room. By January, Evelyn stopped pretending her disapproval was social and turned it into paperwork. She invited me to tea in the morning room, the smallest sitting room on the east side of Whittaker House, where the wallpaper was pale blue and the windows faced the frozen rose garden. There were lemon cookies on a silver tray, 2 porcelain cups, and a leather folder placed neatly beside the teapot. Nothing in that room looked cruel. That was how I knew it was serious. Evelyn poured tea without asking how I took it. "Andrew is under enormous pressure," she said. "The company is entering a delicate period." I watched steam curl above my cup. "Is that why I am here?" She smiled. "You are here because this family cannot afford unnecessary instability." She opened the folder and slid a document toward me. A postnuptial agreement. The words looked stiff and expensive across the top of the page. I read the first paragraph, then the second, then felt my body go very quiet. It asked me to waive any claim to Whittaker assets, any right to spousal support beyond a limited settlement, and any interest in family property, including current and future residences used by the Whittaker family. I almost admired the arrogance of it. They were asking me to give up rights to a house they did not legally own. Evelyn mistook my silence for fear. "It is standard," she said. "Women in your position often misunderstand these things." Women in my position. I looked up. "And what position is that?" Her smile stayed in place. "Married above what they were prepared to handle." The lemon cookies sat between us, untouched, perfect little circles of sugar and butter. I thought of my father's hands, scarred from years of sanding wood and lifting beams. I thought of the cedar box in storage with my name written across the envelope. I thought of every time I had stayed quiet so Andrew would not have to choose. "Does Andrew know you are showing me this?" I asked. "Andrew understands what is necessary." That evening, I found him in our bedroom, standing by the window with the agreement in his hand. He looked older than he had that morning, like a boy wearing his father's worry. "You should sign it," he said. Not angrily, not coldly, almost pleading. "It will calm her down." I stared at him. "Your mother handed me a document that treats me like a temporary guest in my own marriage, and your concern is calming her down?" He rubbed a hand over his face. "Claire, she is not going to change." "Then maybe you should." He flinched, and for one second I thought the words had reached him. Then he looked away. A public fight would be worse. For everyone. There it was again. Everyone. The invisible crowd that always mattered more than the woman standing in front of him. "You mean worse for the family name," I said. He did not deny it. Something fragile inside me did not shatter. It simply released. Love does not always die in one dramatic moment. Sometimes it stops reaching for the door after realizing no one is coming to open it. I took the agreement from his hand and placed it on the dresser. "I am not signing." Andrew's face tightened. "Claire, please do not make this harder." I looked around the room we had shared, the linen curtains Evelyn had chosen, the antique mirror that had reflected too many apologies, the fireplace mantel my father had repaired long before anyone in that house imagined I would sleep there. "I did not make this hard," I said. I just stopped making it easy for you. The next morning, my access to the household account was restricted. By afternoon, the florist called to confirm that all future orders would require Evelyn's approval. At dinner, my chair had been moved one place farther from Andrew's. No one mentioned the agreement. No one had to. Evelyn had made her opening move, Andrew had chosen silence, and I finally understood the marriage I was trying to save had become a room full of locked doors. But somewhere beyond those doors, in a storage unit under my maiden name, the cedar box was waiting. The humiliation Evelyn planned for me did not happen in a courtroom first. It happened under chandeliers, with a string quartet playing near the staircase and 200 guests walking through Whitaker House, as if they were touring a museum that still belonged to the family whose portraits lined the walls. The annual preservation gala had always been Evelyn's favorite performance. She wore emerald satin, Andrew wore black tie, and I wore a navy dress I had bought myself because I was tired of asking permission to look like I belonged. The house glowed that night. Candles flickered along the mantel. White roses spilled from silver bowls. The library doors stood open, showing the walnut shelves my father had brought back to life years before. Guests praised the history, the taste, the legacy, and Evelyn accepted every compliment, as if she had personally held the roof up through every storm. I moved through the rooms quietly, checking flowers, answering small questions from caterers, helping Mrs. Rosa Miller straighten a runner near the hallway. Rosa touched my sleeve and whispered, "You look lovely, Mrs. Clare." Before I could answer, Evelyn's voice floated from the front room. "Victoria, darling, stand beside Andrew for the photograph. The two of you look wonderful together." I turned. Victoria Lane stood near my husband in a champagne-colored gown, laughing softly at something he had not said. She was polished in the exact way Evelyn valued, born into the right clubs, trained in the right schools, familiar with every unspoken rule I had spent 3 years being punished for not knowing. Andrew glanced toward me, then away. That was the moment the room shifted. A photographer raised his camera. Evelyn placed one hand on Victoria's back and the other on Andrew's arm, arranging them like pieces of a future she had already chosen. Someone near the fireplace asked where I should stand. Evelyn smiled without looking at me. "Claire is helping with the house tonight. She understands." Helping with the house. The words were delicate enough that no one gasped. That was Evelyn's art. She could erase a woman in public and make it sound like good manners. My face warmed, but I did not move. I watched Andrew. I gave him one last chance, not with words, just with my eyes. He could have stepped away from Victoria. He could have said, "My wife stands with me." He could have made one sentence stronger than his mother's entire campaign. Instead, he adjusted his cuff and stared past me toward the staircase. A guest I barely knew came to my side a few minutes later, holding a glass of champagne she had not touched. "Are you still living here, dear?" she asked, embarrassed by her own curiosity. Before I could answer, Evelyn appeared beside us as if summoned by cruelty, dressed in perfume. "Not for long," she said lightly. The woman's eyes widened. The words drifted farther than Evelyn intended. Or maybe exactly as far as she intended. Conversation softened around us. Victoria looked down. Andrew heard it. I know he heard it because his shoulders tightened. But still he said nothing. Something cold and clear settled in my chest. Not panic. Not shame. Clarity. I excused myself, walked through the side hallway, and entered the library. The room was empty except for the low hum of music beyond the doors and the smell of old wood warmed by candlelight. I ran my hand along the shelf my father had restored, then opened the hidden drawer in the desk. Inside was the spare brass key he had once given me, wrapped in a faded cloth. I held it for a moment, feeling the grooves press into my palm, then took out my phone and called Martin Hale. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice careful and awake for a man in his 70s. "Claire." I looked toward the closed library doors, where Evelyn was still receiving compliments for a home she thought she controlled. "Mr. Hale," I said, "I think it is time we open the cedar box." There was a pause, then the sound of papers moving on his end, as if he had been waiting years for that sentence. "I will meet you first thing in the morning," he said. When I returned to the gala, Evelyn was laughing beside Victoria. Andrew was holding a glass he had not drunk from, and guests were admiring the carved ceiling. I stood in the doorway and saw the whole scene differently. They were not powerful. They were comfortable. and comfort I was about to learn can make people careless. The next morning I drove to the storage facility under a low gray sky, the kind of Illinois winter morning that makes every building look tired. The unit was 10 feet by 10 feet, tucked at the end of a quiet row, and when I rolled up the metal door, the smell of cardboard, cedar, and old varnish came out like a memory. My father's things were exactly where I had left them. Toolboxes stacked along the wall, wrapped brass fixtures, rolled blueprints tied with string, and the cedar box sitting on a workbench beneath a canvas drop cloth. For a moment I could not touch it. I just stood there in my coat, breathing in sawdust that was no longer there. Hearing my father's voice as clearly as if he had stepped in behind me. Houses remember who cares for them. Martin Hale arrived 10 minutes later in a dark overcoat, carrying a leather briefcase older than some of the Whitaker cousins. He was tall, careful, and silver-haired, with the steady patience of a man who had spent his life making sure signatures meant what people thought they meant. He did not ask if I was all right. He knew I was not. Instead, he placed one gloved hand on the cedar lid and said, "Your father hoped you would never need to use this against anyone." I swallowed. So did I. We carried the box to a small conference room near the facility office, where a vending machine hummed against one wall and fluorescent lights made every paper look too white. Martin unlocked the box with a small key from his briefcase. Inside were the documents I had read years before, but this time they did not feel like history. They felt like a door opening. Deed transfer. Preservation trust agreement. Occupancy terms. Property tax records. County filings. My father's signature. My signature from the year after he passed, when Martin had guided me through the paperwork, while I was too grief-struck to understand how powerful grief can leave you if someone careful protects what matters. Martin spread the pages across the table in neat rows. "Whitaker House is held through the Bennett Preservation Trust," he said. "You are the sole beneficial owner. The Whitaker family has occupancy rights under conditions, but they do not own the property. They cannot remove you from it. They cannot transfer it. They cannot use it as leverage in a marital settlement." The words were simple, clean, almost impossible to absorb. And Evelyn knows none of this? Martin adjusted his glasses. Evelyn knows what she wanted to know. Your father kept the arrangement quiet to preserve the family's dignity. The bank knew. The county knew. The attorneys knew. The Whitakers were notified years ago through counsel, but I suspect Evelyn chose to remember the parts that were convenient. I thought of her at the gala, accepting praise beneath the ceiling my father had saved. I thought of Andrew telling me a public fight would be worse for everyone. I thought of the agreement asking me to waive rights to a home they had no right to demand. My anger did not flare. It settled. That was new. Martin slid a certified copy of the deed toward me. "Claire Bennett Whitaker," he said, tapping the line with one finger. "Owner of record through the trust." I looked at my name, half old life, half married life, printed in black ink where no insult could reach it. What happens now? Martin closed the folder slowly. Now we make sure they hear it from someone they cannot interrupt. By late afternoon, Evelyn's attorney had received notice that I would attend the scheduled divorce discussion the following evening with counsel of my own. She responded within an hour, not to Martin but to Andrew, who forwarded me one sentence by accident or weakness. "Let her bring whoever she wants. She still has to leave." I stared at the message in my car outside the storage unit, the cedar box buckled safely in the back seat. For the first time in months, Evelyn's certainty did not frighten me. It revealed her. She had built her entire plan on the belief that I was poor, grateful, and alone. She had mistaken quiet for empty hands. That night, I returned to Whitaker House through the front gate using the old brass key from the library drawer. Not the code Evelyn kept changing. The house was dark except for the porch lights and the glow from the upstairs windows. I stood in the foyer, listening to the familiar creak of old wood settling in the cold. The portraits watched from the walls. The staircase curved upward like a question. Somewhere in that house, Andrew was probably rehearsing an apology that still protected his mother. Somewhere, Evelyn was preparing to watch me sign myself out of a life she believed she owned. I placed my hand on the banister my father had restored and whispered, "Not tomorrow." The house, for once, seemed to answer in silence. The following evening, Evelyn turned the formal living room into a stage for my surrender. She had chosen the room carefully. Tall windows, cream sofas, oil portraits, a marble fireplace, and the long antique table where Whitaker family announcements had been made for generations. The divorce papers waited at the center in a neat stack, beside a silver pen and a glass of water no one expected me to drink. Andrew stood near the mantel in a charcoal suit, pale and quiet, while Evelyn sat with her attorney on one side of the table, her posture perfect, her pearls resting against black silk. Victoria Lane was there too, tucked near the doorway with a polite expression that said she had been invited to witness the future. I entered alone at first. Evelyn's eyes moved over my navy dress, my simple coat, my empty hands. She smiled. I expected your lawyer. He is parking, I said. Her smile sharpened. Of course. Andrew finally looked at me, and for a second I saw worry cross his face. Not for me. For what I might do to the family peace he loved more than the truth. Evelyn gestured toward the chair across from her. Let us finish this with dignity. I sat, folding my hands in my lap. I would like that. Her attorney cleared his throat and began explaining the agreement as if I had not already read every insult hidden inside it. I would leave within 48 hours. I would waive any claim tied to Whitaker family property. I would accept a limited settlement. I would make no public statement that could damage the family reputation. Evelyn watched me the whole time, waiting for my face to crack. When the attorney finished, she picked up the silver pen and placed it beside the signature page. Claire, this is your chance to walk away gracefully. The front door opened before I could answer. Footsteps crossed the foyer, slow and certain. Martin Hale entered carrying a leather briefcase and a flat document folder sealed with blue tabs. He looked entirely out of place among the polished furniture, which made him look more powerful somehow, like a truth that had refused to dress for the performance. Apologies for the delay, he said. The front gate code appears to have changed again. Evelyn's mouth tightened. Mr. Hale, this is a private family matter. Martin set his briefcase on the table. It became a property matter the moment your proposed agreement referenced a residence your client does not own. The room changed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. It changed the way air changes before a storm, pressure shifting before anyone sees rain. Evelyn blinked once. Andrew stepped away from the mantel. Victoria's hand froze around her clutch. Evelyn's attorney leaned forward. Excuse me. Martin opened the folder and removed 3 certified documents, placing them on the table one by one. County deed record. Bennett Preservation Trust certificate. Current property tax filings. Whitaker House is held through the Bennett Preservation Trust. My client, Claire Bennett Whitaker, is the sole beneficial owner. No one spoke. The silence was so clean it seemed to polish the room itself. Evelyn stared at the papers as if they had been written in another language. That is impossible, she said. Martin adjusted his glasses. It is recorded. This house has been in my husband's family for generations. With respect, Martin replied. History and ownership are not the same thing. Andrew looked at me then, really looked, and I saw the math moving behind his eyes. The library, my father, the cedar box, every repair I had made without asking permission, every insult I had swallowed in rooms that had been legally mine all along. Evelyn stood slowly, one hand on the back of her chair. Claire, what is this? I picked up the silver pen, not to sign, but to move it away from my side of the table. This is what happens when you try to throw someone out before checking whose name is on the door. Martin slid another page forward. Your occupancy agreement allows lawful notice under specific conditions. Given tonight's attempted coercion and the documented restriction of Mrs. Whitaker's access to household resources, we are prepared to begin that process immediately if necessary. Evelyn's face lost its careful color. Victoria took one quiet step backward. Andrew whispered my name, but it sounded different now, less like a plea and more like a man arriving too late at a station after the train had gone. I looked at Evelyn, the woman who had called me temporary in front of guests, who had tried to reduce my marriage to a signature and my worth to a settlement. You were right about one thing, I said. I came into this family with nothing you respected. But this house was never yours to give me. Outside the windows, dusk settled over the lawn. Inside, beneath the portraits in the chandelier, the Whitakers finally looked like guests. The Whitakers did not leave that night. People like Evelyn never surrender in the room where they are corrected. She gathered her papers slowly, as if dignity could be folded back into a leather folder, and said she would have her attorney review everything. Martin only nodded. That would be wise. Andrew followed me into the hallway after everyone else had gone quiet. For the first time in months, he looked less like an heir and more like the man I had once loved in a dusty library, surrounded by drop cloths and sunlight. "Claire," he said, his voice low, "why did you never tell me?" I stopped beside the staircase, my hand resting on the banister my father had restored. "Because I wanted to know if you would choose me before you knew what I owned." His face tightened, not with anger, but with the kind of grief that arrives when someone finally understands the test they failed. "I am sorry." I believed him. That was the hardest part. Andrew was sorry, but sorrow after silence does not rebuild what silence helped destroy. "I know," I said, "but I cannot live in a marriage where I have to become useful before I am defended." 30 days later, Evelyn left Whitaker House under a pale spring sky, wearing sunglasses even though the morning was cloudy. She did not look at me when she stepped into the black town car. Andrew took longer. He carried 2 boxes himself, pausing in the foyer as if the house might forgive him for leaving the wrong person alone inside it for too long. "I hope you make it beautiful," he said. I looked toward the library doors. It already was. It just needs to become honest. The divorce was not simple, but it was clean in the ways that mattered. Martin made sure every notice, settlement term, and property boundary was documented. I did not take joy in the headlines that followed, or in the sudden silence of people who had once smiled at Evelyn's little insults. I had learned that public vindication is loud for a day, but private healing is quiet for much longer. For weeks after they left, I walked through the rooms alone, opening curtains, removing portraits, labeling boxes, and listening to the house breathe without performance. Mrs. Rosa Miller stayed. On her first morning after the change, she brought coffee into the library and asked, "What should I call this place now, Mrs. Claire?" I looked around at the shelves my father had saved, the desk with the hidden drawer, the windows glowing with early light. "Bennett House," I said. "If that feels right." Rosa smiled. "It does." A year later, Bennett House opened its doors not for donors in pearls or developers in tailored suits, but for women starting over after marriages that had made them feel small. The ballroom became a workshop space. The morning room became a legal resource office. The guest suites held temporary residents who needed a safe, respectful place to breathe while they rebuilt their lives. In the library, I kept one photograph of my father on the mantel, not large, not dramatic, just him standing in work boots with sawdust on his shirt and one hand resting on the banister he had restored. Sometimes I still thought about Andrew, not with longing exactly, but with a soft ache for the version of him who might have been saved if he had chosen courage earlier. He wrote once, months after the divorce was final, to say his mother had moved to Palm Beach and that he was stepping back from part of the company. He said he understood now that peace without fairness was only another kind of fear. I did not answer right away. When I did, I wished him well and nothing more. On the first anniversary of Bennett House, I stood in the restored library while afternoon sun moved across the floor in long golden lines. A young woman from the program ran her fingers along the walnut shelves and said, "This place feels like it was waiting for us." I smiled because I knew exactly what she meant. For years, I thought home was a place someone powerful allowed me to stay. Then I learned home is the place where you stop asking permission to belong. I placed my hand on the old banister, felt the smooth wood beneath my palm, and for the first time since I became a Whitaker, I was grateful to be Claire Bennett again.